Hello and welcome everybody. In this video I'm going to be talking about how to get into Cold War reenacting, especially regarding Eastern Bloc countries such as the Soviet Union and East Germany. I hope you enjoy. To start off with, we are obviously going to be talking about how to get your uniforms. In most cases, especially if you're reenacting Soviet, the OBR-69 is going to be your friend, or the Wehrdienst uniform for the East German reenacting from 1970s onward. You might be wondering, where can one get such a uniform from? The answer is quite simple. Most online surplus store, even physical ones, still do have examples of these uniforms available in stock. Keep in mind that these uniforms were made in their millions, and they have been made up until 1991 in most cases. When you decide on which branch of service, regiment, or year you're going to be portraying, all these uniforms will be easy to find on eBay or other websites that actually sell military surplus items. One thing to note is to keep yourself well educated and well researched when it comes to the regulations on how these uniforms were put together, being insignia, the way you wear it, and the size guides. Keep in also mind when it comes to the sizes, they're not going to be the same as our modern medium, large, X-large. They're going to be in different types of systems. An example being, the East German and the Soviet ones being completely different than our standard NATO sizing system. Once you have decided on the impression you're going for, of course, it's a good idea to take a look at the rank and insignia you're going to be using, depending on the branch of service. For example, I mostly do motorized infantry for my Soviet impressions, so I do have a motor rifles officer's uniform and a motor rifles enlisted man's uniform here. Both of these being 1970s and 80s examples for an OBR-69 model uniform, and they do have the correct insignia on them. Another thing to keep in mind when it comes to these uniforms is, are they original? Because there are some instances of reproductions being made available in AliExpress and China. And sadly, most reproductions are not up to standard when it comes to the originals. And due to this, ideally, you should be looking for original uniforms. But luckily, considering how much of a mass scale the Cold War was for preparations for the Third World War, we have stockpiles, almost endless stockpiles of uniforms stored away in storage units or in military surplus depots. Due to this, finding the right size uniform that is an original shouldn't be too difficult, albeit might be more expensive depending on your size. An important thing when it comes to Eastern Bloc uniforms, especially East German and Soviet uniforms, is the usage of the collar liner. It is a key part of the military culture of the post-Second World War Soviet sphere of influence. It was a practice mostly done to protect the uniform collar from sweat and grime and whatnot. So it is something to keep in mind to have, especially if you're portraying East German or Soviet. As you can see, I do have examples of collar liners in all three of my uniforms here for my infantry impressions. When it comes to the field gear, just like anything else regarding uniforms and footwear and headwear and everything, it's the same, where you have countless numbers of examples being made during the Cold War. Therefore, it shouldn't be hard for you to find examples, albeit it depends on where you live. If you live in Europe, it's quite easy to find East German and other European surplus uniforms, whereas if you live somewhere else like the United States, or for me, Turkey, it is harder and harder to get these items without actually getting them shipped from Europe to your own country. It gets even worse when you consider most surplus items that are especially from the Eastern Bloc tend to stay in the Eastern Bloc countries like Russia, and due to sanctions these days, it is quite difficult to get items you need from Russia for your Soviet reenacting purposes. However, luckily, before the sanctions, there were instances of these uniforms being sent to Europe and the United States. So it's easy to find them, even if you can't really order it anymore from Russia or anywhere else, really, for that matter. You should be still able to find them in your own country. I was lucky enough to actually find a couple East German uniform items in Turkey, so that's always a good shout out. Not to mention, there are really good friendly communities who actually do sell the stuff they don't really need anymore to you for a really low price. So making new friends in communities who collect surplus uniforms and items is always a plus when it comes to reenacting, in my humble opinion. When it comes to the firearms, it gets difficult if you live outside the US. Your options are pretty much limited to either deactivated firearms or just airsoft replicas. In my case, of course, I use airsoft replicas due to the fact that it's not legal to own automatic, let alone semi-automatic military surplus firearms in my country. And of course, there are instances of the availability sometimes lacking. Due to this, you have to make do with what you have. For example, I have yet to own an AKM and haven't been able to find an AKM for my East German impression. I'm trying to convert an AK-47 for my East German impression by using Turkish-made East German copy furniture to be used on it to at least replicate the look of an MPI KM. But maybe one day I should be able to get an AKM and should be able to replicate a proper MPI KM for an East German impression. One thing to also note, depending on the army you're mostly doing, your haircut and facial hair will depend greatly. I mostly do Soviet, therefore I have a mustache, and mustaches were allowed in the Soviet army. But when it comes to East Germany, if you're not a reservist or a Volkspolizei member, you don't see anyone with mustaches. So technically what I'm doing is wrong and you shouldn't be doing it. I don't exactly do East German yet. I will shave my mustache if I do East German proper. So you should do the same when it comes to your facial hair and hair in general. But if you want to keep a mustache, there's always the Soviet option. But yeah, also when it comes to, gathering all this equipment and uniforms, as I said before, there are many places where you can buy original items, uniforms, footwear and whatnot, but sometimes they tend to, you can't find the exact size. So what do? In my case, I couldn't find any East German boots, and I asked my East German reenactor friends if I could use Soviet ones for the time being, and they were okay with it. So remember, this hobby is for, at first, having fun, so you shouldn't get really nitpicky about everything as long as it is 100% to close enough, in my humble opinion. So it's not going to be much of a deal breaker if you can't find East German boots in your size and you opt for Soviet ones that are replicas, which is what I do in most cases. But then again, you should be looking for the correct pair for your future events nonetheless. And finally, I would like to talk about something a bit more on the serious representation side of things. You shouldn't be getting your influence from, obviously, Cold War propaganda capability reports written by opposing sides. In most cases, the underestimation of the opposite side is one of the most obvious things you tend to see, especially in Western sources regarding Soviet capabilities. But the same thing can also be said regarding Soviet examples. There are excellent sources online for training purposes that were made and have been uploaded to YouTube, which I tend to use for B-roll footage, and they are really easy to find, especially if you search the language. If you search them in the language they were published in. So it's always good to have a look at training films from the period to get the look and style correct for your uniform, because they are original films, and original films are a godsend when it comes to reenactors, to be honest with you. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this short little video regarding Cold War reenacting. I hope to make more videos about the Cold War and reenacting in general, and what to do, what not to do, sort of thing. And if you guys have any comments, anything to say, please do comment them down below. Give us a like and subscribe if you haven't. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers.